Hi everyone, my name's Lauren. I am the Senior Manager of Marketing and Community for Power to Fly, and I am thrilled to be here with, as I was just saying, one of the Chat and Learn veterans, Barb, who I'm going to introduce in just a few minutes, for another awesome session on creating dashboards in Excel. So another really interactive workshop today, which is kind of unlike all of our other chats, but really highly requested by our community. So we're gonna have a little bit of a different format today than we usually do, but still at the core of what we do here at Power to Fly, we wanna make this as interactive and engaging as humanly possible. So with that being said, I'm gonna pop to my agenda or my housekeeping slide. And above all, I want to encourage everyone today to participate. So I see a lot of new names on this participant list, and that is super exciting. And welcome to all of you who've never been here before. This is so great. And welcome back to anyone who has been here many times. I see so many repeat attendees, which is fantastic. So excited to have you here. And you know the drill. These conversations, or these chats rather, are meant to be super conversational. We don't want to sit here and just be talking at you. We want to hear from you and your experiences and answer your questions and dive into your data, honestly, and understand the topic at hand just a little bit more. So this is also a really great time to do some virtual networking with myself, with our co-host Barb today, and then with each other. So we just got to meet some people live and got to do a little chatting before we went live and recorded, but feel free to message us in the chat, message each other. And then of course, if you have anything that you'd like to share anonymously, feel free to message me privately and I will relay your questions to the group. Last but not least, we are recording today's chat. So again, put your pen, paper down for the meantime, actively listen to what we're discussing today. And then when we send out the recording, probably tomorrow or Friday, you can go back and revisit all of the great tools and skills Barb is going to teach us about today during our chat. So that's a lot of talking from me. I want to kick things over to Barb, who again has been here so many times. If you haven't attended one of her chats, definitely go back and watch some of the earlier ones. They're incredible, but really excited to have you here and just always appreciate you taking the time to chat with our community and teach us all a little something new. So thank you, Barb, for being here.
Oh, thank you for the kind words. That's so nice. And yes, I can introduce myself really quickly. So I've done these quite a few times, like Lauren said, and I run a statistical consulting firm. So I have a bachelor's degree in statistics, and I've always liked math, and I've been doing math for pretty much my whole career. And I worked at an insurance agency as a data analyst for a while, and then I worked for a statistician who did his own consulting, and then he retired, and I thought, oh, I'd love to keep doing this. So then I just started doing my own consulting. It's been thankfully going really well, and I'm glad that I was able to kind of keep doing this job that I love, even though it's pretty niche. That's all we do is statistical consulting and help businesses like take their data and get meaningful insights from it so they can make smarter decisions. And you can see a couple other things I do there on the slide and some of the platforms that I'm familiar with. And of course, today we'll be focused mostly on Excel.
Awesome, and I am so excited to dive in. Your demos are always so fantastic. So really everyone participate and follow along with Barb. She's gonna just teach you so much good stuff today. But with that being said, there were some really good questions. I tried to just pick out a few that I thought we could answer quickly. So Barb, I don't know if you wanna hit these now or we wanna come back to them at the end.
Yeah, well, I was thinking the end. I'm indifferent though, it's up to you.
Okay, let's do the demo first, and then we'll kind of get to these as we go along. But again, you know, this is a little different than what we usually do. So we're going to dive into all this great learning today. And if you do have questions, you know, feel free to either hop off mute and interrupt and ask your questions, or type them in the chat and I will relay them kind of as we go along. So I'm going to stop sharing and then let you take it away.
Okay, so I do have a slide deck for this, but it's going to be really interactive too, and I will distribute the slide deck on Twitter and probably in the email that Lauren sends out afterwards too. So don't worry, you'll all have a copy of it by the end. And like Lauren said, if you want to follow along, I do have an Excel file that you can download and follow along with me. If you plan on doing that, I would download it now, like right this minute. Click this link, which I will put it in the chat. for everyone right here, and get that going so that once, I'm going to talk a little bit about dashboards to give everybody time to, get it up and going, but then we're going to start doing it. So if you want to follow along, I just put that in the chat. Go ahead and download the Excel file there. If you can't follow along, like you don't have Excel or it's not working, don't panic. Like Lauren said, it's recorded. So you can always go back and look at it later and you'll have the slide deck. So in this file is going to be a raw data set, a clean data set, an analysis sheet, and an example dashboard. And then we're going to start building a dashboard on our own today together. We're not going to finish in an hour, of course, but we'll start, and then you have the example there of a completed one. You can kind of see how it's working because you'll have the Excel file. And let's talk about what a dashboard is on the whole, which some of the questions that came in, I think, asked about this anyway, which is why I was like, oh, maybe we'll do the questions at the end. Typically, a dashboard is a collection of data visualizations. I strongly suggest avoiding lots of text or tables in your dashboard. It's not wrong, but people usually want to see things quickly and easily, and visualizations accomplish that. The human brain interprets those better than tables of numbers or paragraphs of text. So something like this on the slide would be a great dashboard. And then they're often connected to a live data source and dynamic and updatable, not always. People use the term report and dashboard interchangeably, but usually when I think of report, I think something that's not changing. It's just static and one-time thing, whereas a dashboard is live and dynamic. But again, that's not always the case. You can have a dashboard that doesn't change. People aren't very strict about the terms, I think, in the real world. So what are the components of a good dashboard? These, to me, are the big ones. I mean, again, we're limited to an hour, so I can't cover every single possible component of a dashboard, but if you could even start with these, I think you'd be in really good shape. Intentional use of color and color consistency. So really thinking about what color am I making this variable? And if I make, let's say you're comparing your salespeople and Jim is blue. Jim should be blue everywhere if you can. Now, sometimes if you've got a lot of variables, you don't want it to turn into like a rainbow and look ridiculous. So in that case, sometimes there are different things you can do, like shading, like you can see in this visual here, but you want to try to at least use the color in some way that helps people to digest the information. So here in this dashboard example, these are all dashboards I did. You can see the shading in the background. That's clearly defining these are different companies in this case, and it separates them. And you want to use contrasting colors that are easy to read. If I were to make like, the first one that blue and then the next one a slightly lighter shade of blue, it can get really confusing. So something that's somewhat contrasting is pretty helpful. And then you want to think about your layout before making the dashboard. I actually draw dashboards out on paper, believe it or not, I swear to God, in 2019. And the reason is I don't draw the whole thing in detail, but I'll say, okay, 3 circles here. What if I did 3 side-by-side pie charts and then below that a line plot? And then I'll be like, no, I don't like that. Crumple it up, throw it away, start over. It's a lot easier to like kind of just think and focus on the data that way, I think, than to just start in on Excel. So I plan things out pretty carefully. And there are different layouts that are pretty common. Like this one actually on the screen is a very common layout where if you're trying to compare multiple things, you just line them up next to each other and then people can glance across and really quickly compare. So that can help you decide how you're going to lay out your dashboard too. But that's a big key. You don't want to just kind of throw charts anywhere. You know what I mean? You want to have intention when you're doing it. And then highlighting and calling out things that you want your audience to look at, particularly. So you see how I have these little circles here around this dot and there's like an arrow there. I'm telling the person reading this, because not everybody looks at charts all day, every day, right? It's really hard for people to interpret charts sometimes. So you're telling them this is what you should be paying attention to out of this chart because it's telling us X, Y, Z. And then finally, as you're going to see in our demonstration, dashboards require usually lots and lots of formatting. And unfortunately, it's all manual. People always ask me, is there a dashboard button in Excel? And I'm like, I'm sorry, there is not, it doesn't exist. It is a lot, like this took a lot more time to format than it did to actually make the charts and do the analysis. Like it's just such a pain, and you'll see that when we go through it. All right, so if you were downloading that file, if you plan on following along, we're gonna start in the file. And again, if you couldn't get it up or whatever, don't worry. But for those of you that did, let's start actually building a dashboard in Excel. So open up that Excel file that was in that link, and you should see a table. Let me explain really quickly why tables are really important. I didn't think we had time to actually make it on our own, but it's very easy. It's just insert table. And someone asked about this in the questions too, efficiency. This is an efficiency move. If you don't have a table, let me show you what happens. And if you're not familiar with pivot tables, you'll be able to follow along with this, but you know, I would recommend kind of looking into pivot tables on your own later. But if I go to insert pivot table and there's no table, it says A1 colon AJ 1471, right? That's set in stone. Even if I take away the dollar signs, it's not going to change unless I go manually change it later. So if I add data, it's not going to pick it up automatically. And that can be a huge pain in the neck, depending on what you're trying to do and how you do your analysis later. And then you might have to keep redoing everything, which is awful, right? So the way around that is make a table first, which I did for you in this clean data sheet. And now when we go to insert pivot table, notice it says table 1 here instead of A1 colon AJ whatever. I can add to table 1 and it's still table 1. I can remove from table 1 and it's still table 1. So you're keeping it connected all the way through your analysis, from data to pivot tables and formulas to charts, so that when something changes, it all updates. That's kind of like a little side note tidbit, but one that I think is a big deal and has changed my life with making visualizations and charts and stuff in Excel. So if you didn't see what I did, I went to insert and then pivot table. From the table, you should see this, and then you're going to hit OK. And you should see a pivot table. And pivot tables might seem scary at first. And again, this chat is not about pivot tables, so we're not going to go over them in super detail, but we're going to make a couple, and they're not too bad to make. So as it says on the slide, we're going to put education field into the rows box, which yours might say axis, that's fine. And then we're going to put ID into the values box. So let's start with that. So find education field, and if they're not in alphabetical order, you can actually search in the search bar up here and drag it into the rows box. And you can see it's giving me all the unique values that show up in the education field column. By the way, this is a human resources data set. It's a fake data set of people that work at IBM. Again, it's not real, but it gives information about like how long they've been at the company and what field they studied in school and what position they have, all this kind of stuff. So education field, I believe, is the field they studied in school. And then we're going to go up to the top and drag ID into the values box. But look what it defaulted to, a sum. It doesn't make sense to add up the ID numbers of the employees, right? We want to count up the ID numbers, just to count the number of employees that are in each of these fields. So on a Mac, you would click the I button and change it to count. On a PC, it's going to be a little drop down little icon here, and you're going to choose value field settings and then change it to a count. Now you should see different numbers. And the beauty of this now is I can just make sure I'm clicked in my pivot table and go to insert bar chart. You don't have to highlight anything and it'll be connected to the pivot table. So I'm in my pivot table, I go to insert and bar chart. And I'm going to pick the first one here, just 2D column, very first option. Awesome, right? So now everything is connected, and if we had time, I would do a demonstration of, like, again, if I added something to that original table and I changed it, like maybe I added another employee in human resources. All I'd have to do is go up to my data menu and hit refresh. And then the human resources count would go up by 1, it would be 28. And the bar on my bar chart would also go up by 1 for human resources. So everything now is connected. And this is really important for efficiency and not having to redo things in Excel. So this looks good so far. And again, I wish I could slow down if anyone is having trouble keeping up, but we have a time limit. But it is best practice to sort bar charts descending, unless there's some really strong reason to keep it in the original order, which we don't have in this case. So let's right click on the numbers in the pivot table and choose sort largest to smallest. Much better. So now our bar chart is sorted descending, and this is part of formatting and getting it all looking nice for the dashboard. All right, now we're going to copy our pivot table and paste a new pivot table below it. And instead of education field, we're going to look at overtime. So we're going to have at least 2 charts in our beginnings of our dashboard. So copy this first pivot table and go down quite a bit. The reason you want to leave some space is because if you add filters later, they go above the pivot table. So you need to leave space. And this new pivot table is now not connected to the first one. So I can change it and it won't affect the first one. So what I'm going to do is remove education field from the rows. I'm going to take it out and put it either back in the list, or you can even like drag it out here. It'll just disappear. Then I'm going to search for overtime and pull that into the rows instead. So now I can see how many people, I guess, worked some level of overtime this year at this company and who didn't. And then once again, just to make if I want to make a pie chart from this, which is what we want, all I have to do is make sure I'm clicked inside that pivot table and go to insert pie chart. And now I've got another chart. And again, normally you'd have many more charts for a dashboard, but we're gonna stop here so that I wanna take you through the whole process. You can at least see a little snippet of each part of making the dashboard, and then you could go back on your own and put it together, you know, and with more charts and everything like that. So now I've got my two charts. Like I said, unfortunately, all formatting in Excel is pretty manual, and there's a lot of ways that you can format to get nice looking dashboards. Here's just some of them. I listed them out. I don't have to read down every single one, but changing the colors, adding labels. We're gonna do a couple of these together, but it's a lot of formatting and putting things together. So let's start by just moving our visualizations onto their own sheet and aligning them. You don't have to move them onto their own sheet, but I like to keep things organized that way, where all my pivot tables are on one sheet and all my visualizations are on another sheet. So we're going to click on the first chart or any one of the charts, hold down Shift and click on the other one to select both charts at once. And then I'm going to cut those, which is Command X on a Mac or Control X on a PC. And I'll make a new sheet and paste them. They're still connected, and this is just how you can move them onto another sheet. So now I kind of put them next to each other, but I'm not going to sit there and try to drag it perfectly so it matches up with each other, right? Well, good news, Excel has a solution for that. Once again, if you highlight both of them, you have to click on one, hold Shift and click on the other, go up to the Shape Format menu, choose Align, and then you have all these options of how you want to align them. So if I hit Align Top, you have to watch, it's a little bit fast, but the pie chart is going to snap up to meet with the top of the bar chart. And now they're perfectly aligned that way. And you can vertically space them, and there's a whole bunch of different ways that you can align them, but now they're perfectly centered. And when you get a bunch of charts, you can even align them to each other, whether it's like 5 or 10 of them. It can get really fancy, but it's a really nifty tool. Very similar to PowerPoint, if anyone's done that in PowerPoint. Great, those are aligned. Now let's say I want to recolor my charts. I don't want to use Excel's default option of blue and orange. This is so fussy, and later in the presentation, you'll see that I have a blog post actually solely dedicated to formatting charts in Excel, because it is an extremely fussy process. So you have to click twice, but not double click to select a slice of a pie chart or a bar in a bar chart in Excel. So let's say I want to recolor the orange one. I click once, and that actually selected the whole pie chart. Then I just click once again on the orange, and now only the orange is selected. Now I have to right click on the orange and choose Format Data Point. If you don't see Format Data Point, you did something wrong. If it says Format Data Series, that means you've still selected all of them. You want just that one data point, which is the one slice. But once you see that, now I can go to the spill paint icon and under fill, change it to any color I want. I'm just gonna make it like a nice light blue, because again, there's too many variables here for me, I think, to meaningfully color code them. I'm probably not gonna use overtime again, or maybe any of the education fields. So for now, we'll just make it nice, aesthetically appealing. Great, so that's how we can read or change the one color in the pie chart. It is extremely fussy. And I have screenshots of this in the slide deck for anyone that, if you want it that way too. Now we can remove the grid lines and the borders to give it kind of a floating effect. So if you look at the example dashboard that I made, it looks like everything's just kind of floating in Excel. People really like the way that something like this looks. And again, you can see how I did this. It's all in the file. There's no special add-ons or anything required. You can look, these are all references. You can look up to the function bar and see what I did. This is a slicer tool, by the way, which If we have time at the end, I would love to show you, but we'll see if we have enough time. But it's really cool. If you click it, it's like applying a filter on the go, and it'll change your entire dashboard based on what you're filtering by. So in this case, I'm filtering by departments. It's actually very easy to do. It's just clicking a button, but it's a really nifty tool for making dynamic dashboards in Excel. But anyway, the point I was making here was we want it to kind of appear like it's floating. The reason it doesn't look like it's floating when you first make it is, number one, the charts have borders around them, and number two, there are grid lines. So let's get rid of the grid lines first. Click on any cell in the sheet and go to View and uncheck grid lines. And now you can really clearly see those borders, right? So the borders around each chart by default. To get rid of the border, and again, this is really fussy, you have to click on the chart area, not the plot area. Do you see the difference there? This tighter rectangle is the plot area, and this white space is the chart area. I don't know why Excel makes things so difficult. Well, you want to right click on the chart area and choose Format Chart Area. And again, if you don't see that, it means something went wrong. And then we're just going to go under border here and say no line. And do the same thing for the bar chart. And if you're in this panel, you can just click on the chart area of the bar chart and hit no line. And now it looks like they're floating in the background. You can even get rid of the grid lines too if you want to, but I'll leave them. I think they're a little bit helpful. So that's how you can kind of do that when you're making a dashboard in Excel. And when you're doing dashboards in other programs like Tableau, or you do them online or Click, a lot of these principles still apply, except maybe this one. This one is more specific to Excel with the grid lines and the borders. Like Tableau, it's borderless and grid lineless defaults, you know, same thing with Click. But everything else, all the things we talked about with the colors and lining things up and all that, should all apply to wherever you're making a dashboard. Great. And then now let's say we also want to add some data labels. And again, some of this is just subjective. Like, I personally don't like this legend out here. I think it would look a lot cleaner and easier to read if I just had these on the slices themselves. This legend isn't even necessary. There's only one color. So why do I even have a legend at all? So let's get rid of the legend. So you can click on the legend and make sure it's bracketed in, like you can see the square around it, and just tap delete on your keyboard. And then same thing here. And then to add the data labels on the pie chart, I can right click on the pie chart somewhere, it doesn't matter in this case, and hit add data labels. But it's not adding the ones that I want, it's adding the value. So I have to right click now on the data labels themselves. Now it is specific, and you have to right click on the data label and choose Format Data Labels. You're going to check off category name instead of value. You can uncheck value. And now the yes and the no are visible and on the slices. And you can format these just like you would any other text. Like, I can go up here and change the color of the text to white and make it bold and increase the size, you know, whatever you want. All right, and like Lauren said, feel free to call out with questions. I know this is fast, and I'm trying to squeeze it all into our hour session, but we're making good time. So if anybody has questions or wants to talk about one of these techniques, feel free to come on microphone.
No questions so far. Just send a couple links, and definitely people saying that they're going to rewatch this, and this is a good one. So
Awesome.
Good job.
Good. All righty, so we added the data labels. Now let's change the title, or the axis title on the chart, and add one. It is really good practice to do this. You don't want to leave this just saying total, right? Like, you want it to be descriptive. Everything should be labeled on a dashboard. So instead of total, I'm just going to click in here, and sometimes it can be a pain to get your mouse in there in the little text box, but you got to get in there. And then I'll rename this number of employees by education field. That's what it is. And that's how I was always taught to name charts, is y-axis by x-axis. So my y here is number of employees, my x is education field, and you literally just stick the word by in between them. And then this one was overtime, so I'm just going to call it overtime, but you could say like overtime breakdown or percentage overtime, whatever you want. And now I need a label on my y-axis. This is like one of the #1 questions I get when I'm doing this with people, is how do I label the y-axis? Excel does not make it that intuitive, especially on a Mac. You have to go up to the design menu, and you have to be clicked on the chart to see the design menu. So you can go up here to design and say add chart element axis titles, and then primary vertical. And that's going to add it, and then you got to get your mouse in there again to change it. And this is number of employees. Now these are labeled a lot better. I can at least more clearly see what's going on. And you can really go nuts with these if you want to. You can, again, you can choose the color, the font, the size of any of this. And people who make those really fantastic looking dashboards, that's what they do. They spend a lot of time editing the fonts and editing the colors and tweaking things. And you can see it's a very manual, tedious process. And it's just what it is. Okay. That was actually the last thing that I had. So maybe I should have slowed down a little bit, but I do know we have quite a few questions too. I wanted to leave enough time for questions, and I can demonstrate that slicer tool as well if we have time for that. But Lauren, did you want to start with the questions first and then do the slicer tool if we have time?
Yeah, let me just poll the audience right now. Does anyone who's on the line right now have any questions about what Barb was talking about, her demo right there specifically? We'll get to those first, and then we can go into your pre-submitted questions. So don't be shy. This is your time. Barb knows so much about all this stuff. So if anything's unclear, or you want to see something redone, or you know, if something were different or scenario based. Okay, question here. Do you have recommendations for color schemes that will work well with people with impaired color vision, or perhaps colorblind? Great question.
Yeah, this is such a good question, and it should be in here. I'll have to add it before I share the slide deck. But yes, this is something you definitely want to consider, because I think there are a lot more people that are colorblind than we realize. This comes up all the time. I was teaching a corporate class last year, and this came up a lot. There were several people that said that they were colorblind. I believe it's red and greens. I don't remember exactly, but yes, you should always definitely be considering that, and Googling, you know, like what are the colors that you should not put together. And we do that when people indicate there's a problem. And I do try to follow it by default too, but yes, it comes up all the time, and it's like a really legit problem. I think it's red and greens, if I remember, because I know we avoid those for that reason. There might be another one too. There's different types of color blindness, I think. Yeah, that's a really good question.
Awesome. Thank you, Patricia. That's really important to remember. Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah, she says red green is most common, blue yellow is rarer.
Yeah, I thought it was red green. That was the big one.
Awesome. Last call. I guess it doesn't have to be the last call, but I'm going to start asking my other questions in a second. Awesome. No worries. I'm going to share my screen now again. And these are some really good questions that everyone preemptively asked. And again, I think Barb covered a lot of these, but not all of them. So let's just go through these, and perhaps these will prompt some more questions of yours. And then, of course, we can get to that slicer tool as well. But good place to start. What tips do you have for creating dashboards in Google Sheets versus Excel?
Yeah, so again, the goal of that deck was to try to, as quickly as possible, because I never know how long things will take, but get you through the whole process so that you could see, like, start to finish in little chunks, what making a dashboard looks like, from getting the raw data into a table, making the pivot tables and formulas. We didn't do formulas, but that's common too. And then keeping it all connected, making your charts and formatting them into a dashboard. So you can go through that whole process in Excel. You can do it in Google. You cannot do it fully in Google Sheets. So Google Sheets is a little bit less robust than Excel. And I think they do that on purpose. I don't think they're trying to be Excel. So, like, for example, you can't do a table in Google Sheets. Last I checked, tables don't exist in Google Sheets. So that's already out the window. You can do all the formatting. It will be different though, like the commands and the clicking and everything, which it might honestly even be more intuitive for some people, but it'll just be different though than what I just demonstrated. And I'm sure there's other features that don't exist in Google Sheets that do in Excel. Like I love Google, but I do think that in this case, Excel would be probably better for this purpose than Google Sheets.
Yeah, makes sense. And let me know in the chat if anyone has any other specific Google Sheets versus Excel questions, because I think there's Tons. Where can I get templates? It's another really good question.
Yeah, I saw this question come in, and I don't use templates, so I feel so bad. I can try to find some, but I found that I think they just take more time personally than doing it yourself, because often I don't think it actually really, I think it's hard to find something that's going to come close to what you need. And like I said, I usually draw it out and really kind of think through the particular data set. And there are, though, some cases where you are using the same style of dashboard over and over, like I said, where you're comparing it. I'm sure templates must be out there. I don't know, though. I don't know how you would even, I can't even imagine it in Excel. But yeah, I don't have great advice on templates, unfortunately. I never use them. But if I come across anything, I'll be sure to send it out.
Awesome. Our next question here is, what are some of the standard procedures for creating dashboards? And I'm pretty sure you just gave us a good overview of the standard procedure, but is there anything else that we should know?
Yeah, I mean, again, I tried to cover what I thought were the most important things, and it was not comprehensive, though, of course, like we're so limited. Sometimes these sessions go by so fast, and I wanted to make sure I got in the critical things, but there's more. I mean, some people go really deep into color theory, for example, and like there's a guy called Edward Tufte who's like really famous in this area, and you can go crazy with like hue and saturation and all these different things for making visualizations. And then there's people who are really strict about the types of data visualizations. Like there's a great book called Creating More Effective Graphs by Naomi Robbins that talks about like, there's a whole coalition of people who are very against pie charts now, for example. I'm not quite as against them, but I understand their reasoning. Is because they say the human brain can't interpret angles as well as it can just like 90 degrees. Like the other angles are harder. So, I mean, you can go really deep with all this stuff is my point. But I tried to model the slide deck of like, these are the big things that you need. And also just the most frequent questions that I get, like labeling the y-axis was a hugely common question. Taking away the grid lines. People are always like, how did you make it look like it was floating? I'm like, you just removed the grid lines. so that's how I kind of tried to tailor that. And if anyone has a follow-up, let me know, obviously to this.
That's a really good point about kind of the visualization of the data. And we did a couple chats. I can't remember if we did it with you specifically, but about like kind of telling a story with your data and how to kind of convey that message, and how these visualizations really, play an important role in that. And whoever you're showing the data to, or your visualizations, that's really important. So I feel like we could probably do an entire chat on how to do that more effectively, whether it's through color theory or type of graph. Let me see, I do think there's a chat or a question in the chat. Do you have any resources where I could learn more about how to make dashboards look good and easier to read? Good question.
Yeah, in addition to that one book about choosing effective graphs for the dashboard, there's another book I have, Storytelling with Data. I forget the author's name. It's a very popular book. And it's just like Lauren was saying, where, you want to really think about your audience and what is their level of skill with like reading graphs, but then also like, what do you want them to know? I also just try to think of like, what action could somebody take from this graph? And if I can't think of one, I don't necessarily immediately exclude it, but then I'm like, I will question more like, do I really need this graph here? What is someone getting out of my dashboard? I think that's the ultimate purpose of it, right? Is you're making something so someone can make a decision to do some action. And if it doesn't help them do that, then we start to question like, should I be changing this or reevaluating? But other than the books, I can't think of another resource off the top of my head. But if one comes to mind, of course, I'll send it out in the email after this. But those books are definitely a good place to start.
Yeah, that's awesome. Would love links to those to share for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Next question, and you definitely touched on this a little bit, but how do you automate processes in Excel?
Yeah, I was hoping that, you all kind of saw the tables. We'll do that a little bit. I don't know if automate is the right word, but they'll make your workflow way more efficient so that you're not redoing things. If you want to truly automate. I think macros or getting into some kind of coding in Excel, like VBA, would be the way to do that. I actually don't find the need to do that very often. I've written macros and whatnot, but it was a very long time ago. I feel like things have evolved and people don't really use them maybe quite as much anymore, unless you're in like a really big corporation where they're very entrenched in the Microsoft ecosystem and you're doing them a lot. But yeah, other than that, other than macros and what I just showed you, I think that those are the two big ways. And the other way that a table can automate in a way is if you're pulling data into Excel from a SQL server or some other live data source and you don't have a table and your data is expanding and contracting every day, you're gonna get all the wrong answers and lose data, and it's gonna be awful. So the example I always give is when I worked at the insurance company, they wanted yesterday's Facebook data. Well, you don't know how many rows you're going to get in from Facebook on a given day because it depends on how many people click on your site and like your page and all these other factors. So one day, if on day one, 20 rows came in, right? And then on day two, 10 rows came in. If you didn't have a table, on day two, it's going to overwrite the first 10 rows of your 20, but leave the second half, which you don't want if you're trying to analyze on a day-by-day basis. But the table will fix that. If you make that data into a table as soon as you get it, should be the first thing that you do, even if you're not connected to a SQL data source, it'll expand and contract with any data source that's flowing or not coming in and out. And then you won't have to deal with those problems later on.
Great. And we have some great resources being shared in the chat right now.
I see them. Yeah, I have heard of Makeover Monday, and information is beautiful. Yeah, you know, dashboards are a little bit subjective. So yeah, if you see examples on those sites, that is a great thing to do. Is just look at other examples. You know, what do you like? While still keeping in mind, though, you know, what are you putting front and center? So that what are people focusing on? Are you getting the message across? But some of it is subjective. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Our next question here, can you export data from Word into Excel?
Yeah, if the person who wrote this is on the call, I would love further context on this one. Like, if you mean like a table in Word, then yes, I would just copy and paste it. If you mean something else, like if it's just kind of like paragraphs or whatever, you'd have to have some kind of like comma separation or delimiter so you can pull it into Excel. But if is the person that wrote this on the call right now? Anybody?
Bueller.
Okay, well, if that person writes in the chat, we can come back to it. But yeah, I mean, you can usually just copy and paste depending on what format it's in.
Great. Next, how do we make sure the dashboard is scalable for a fast-growing company? And I think that probably your table example is suitable for, or your table answer is probably suitable for this question as well. But
well, yeah, I have an addition though, because I think I know a little bit what this person might be getting at, and it's Excel does have a limit of 1,048,000 some rows. So yeah, it's not scalable as your company gets larger and larger if you're trying to get all that data in there. It won't open once it goes past 1 million rows. So it's one of the biggest drawbacks of Excel and why people move on to other programs. And I think one of the upcoming questions too was about other programs. So I will talk a little and hope it doesn't get too much into the other question. But yeah, at that point, you have to move to something else, whether it's Tableau or a coding language like Python or R. Those two, I think, have no limits. But you're always going to be limited by the ability of your computer. So like if your computer doesn't have a lot of processing power, it's either going to take hours upon hours to do anything or it just won't work. It'll, you know, Tableau will shut down, scripts will stop running. So there's always limitations unless you hook up multiple computers or have a server like you're using Amazon or Google servers that can handle that scalability. But yeah, for dashboards, at some point you are going to have to migrate from Excel to another program. You can apply a lot of these principles, like I said, that we talked about, and thinking about things and the color theory and all that. And then yeah, you're going to have to pick a program that can handle more when visualizing.
Yeah, makes total sense. And I think that next question is next. So perfect segue, but when is Excel sufficient? When should we look to Tableau, and what scenarios indicate Click be the preferred tool?
Yeah, that first reason I gave of obviously when you hit the data limits. And then if you have a lot of mapping that you need to do, like geographic data, Excel is not really good for that. There might be an add-on, but I don't think it's very good. Tableau is excellent with mapping. ArcGIS is excellent with mapping. Those would probably be my top two choices if you're doing a lot of geographic stuff. I actually don't like Click very much. I'm sorry. I know this question comes up every time and I'm so uncomfortable saying it, but I have used Click in the past. It would not be my program of choice. I think it's just kind of very buggy and it doesn't quite have the functionality of Tableau, or I think even Power BI is a little bit better than Click. So Click would be at the bottom of my list. They're actually in Pennsylvania too. Their office is right near me. They're gonna come get me one day. But yeah, I would probably pick, I mean, Tableau is very expensive though. I get it. Like Tableau is atrociously expensive. So if you're in a situation where you're trying to move to something else, your company's trying to move something else, you don't want to invest the time and resources into learning Python or R, which those are not easy to learn. I mean, it's going to take at least a year and it's very challenging. Then I would probably pick Power BI as my second choice to Tableau if you can't afford Tableau.
And Carmen in the chat wants to know, what do you think of Data Studio?
I actually don't use Google Data Studio very often. I tried it once and I remember I had some kind of problem with it, but I've heard it's improving. I think it was mostly built for analyzing Google data, like Google Analytics and whatnot. I remember the features. I can't remember, it was a very long time ago that I tried it and I remember dismissing it because I think it just didn't have all the features that I wanted. So I don't think it's as robust as the others, but I've heard from people in the space that it's improving and people are starting to like it more. So I wouldn't be surprised if one day it gets to that point. I don't know if it's there right now though. Last I checked it wasn't. Just didn't have enough features.
We use Data Studio. She says, yes, it's improving, but still having some issues. I love Data Studio, but I don't know how to use it. So
yeah, I usually like what Google makes. They tend to do a really good job. Tableau is, I mean, they're very good. They're very far ahead of the game. It would be hard. It's going to be hard for them to, I think, catch it, but I'm sure they can do it. It's just they're not there quite yet. Like if I had to choose, I would pick Tableau. But
right, no, makes total sense. I want to give one last call to action for. Oh, Cameron says, I heard that Tableau is so expensive.
I know it's expensive. I know it's atrocious. I know.
Craziness. I feel like we talk about Tableau as this.
You got to be a millionaire.
Yeah. But this is great. Thank you, everyone. I want to give one last, open floor to anyone who might have additional questions here. And if not, then we can kind of dive into that slicing experience or slicing example. We have like 15 minutes left, so plenty of time to kind of talk about that and dive in a little deeper. But again, is there anything else for those of you on the line you're curious about or want to learn a little bit more? Product information? Send your questions in the chat, and I'm happy to relay them. If not, I'll pass it back over to you, Barb. We can dive into that last. Oh, one more question. Can you recommend a good tutorial for pivot tables?
Ooh, that is a tough one. I'm sure there's got to be one online. I was actually told that Microsoft's tutorials are pretty good, which at first I was skeptical about, but their documentation has improved vastly over the last couple of years. So I'd probably start with Microsoft. And then if that's no good, there are, in terms of free tutorials, I'm sure that maybe like Khan Academy or one of those might have them. There's a lot of paid classes out there, but there's got to be at least another free one online. I think I have a blog post planned too for pivot tables in the upcoming future, so you can keep an eye on my blog too. But it's not like a full class. It will be like a tutorial style, but it'll be like a blog post. So
I want to say that we did one a long time ago.
I've lost track of the webinars we've done. I don't remember. Maybe.
Yeah, well, I mean, even I think before, I think that was like one of our very first like Power to Fly, even before we did these chats. I think we did like a learning on pivot tables. So I'm gonna like look at that while Barb is kind of doing that other example. And we also talked about doing one of these just specifically for pivot tables. So maybe we bring that back to life. Let me see if there's one more question in here. Nope, I think we're good. Okay, Barb, I'm going to kick it back over to you and look for that pivot table link, and we'll go through that last example.
Yeah, you guys are lucky that we get to go through this. Like, a lot of people like the slicer tool a lot. So as you saw from my example here, the slicer tool is literally like a way that you can allow the user of your dashboard to filter it on their own. There's a couple benefits to this. Not only is it really awesome, but when you have a data set that has just so many categorical variables, and by that I mean text columns, it can get really nuts to try to get them all into one dashboard. So, I mean, if you look at the original data here, I'm sorry, let me go to the table one. There's so many columns, right? There's this travel one and the department and the education field. I'm talking about the text columns. And then gender and job role. I can look at so many permutations of this, right? I could look at education field by gender, and then education field by job role, and job role by gender, and all those by marital status. You could go on forever. I mean, you could see I did a bunch of example pivot tables for you. It's already getting nuts. Like, you could have pages and pages of these. The slicer will help you organize things a little bit more instead of having massive dashboards where you're scrolling and scrolling, or multiple dashboards. I do tend to actually prefer multiple dashboards to scrolling on one dashboard. And that's actually Stephen Few is a very famous person in this space too with dashboards, and that's his recommendation, I believe, as well, is you want it on one page instead of the user having to scroll, because when you scroll, you have to remember, right? You have to look at this, interpret it, remember it, and then go down, and then interpret that, and remember it, and go down, and it becomes very difficult. So the slicer can help with all that. It's actually a very useful tool. So if we go to our example that we did in class here, or sorry, not class, in the webinar. We're not in a classroom. And it seems like a little class. I do Zoom classes. I'm so used to that. You have to be clicked on one of the pivot tables, and you make the slicer from the pivot table. So I'm going to click on this pivot table and go to Insert, Slicer. And I told you it's not that hard. It's a button, and then I'm going to choose, I want to choose something that's not in my pivot tables, because if I choose, for example, overtime, right, and I slice by yes, well, now I've got a pivot table that just says no. Like, it's not that helpful. So let's pick something that we don't plan on using in the pivot tables. I'll pick department. And let me do something different, because I picked department in the other one. Let me pick gender. And you can pick multiple, by the way, and it'll give you multiple slicers, but I'm just going to pick one for now and hit OK. And it just gives you the little slicer thing. And you can see when I click through female and male, it is changing the numbers in the pivot table. The slicer is connected to the pivot table, not to the charts directly. And this is what I was trying to get at with the tables too. That's so important, is like everything is connected, and it's all connected to the underlying data. So when you make that chart, the chart is connected to the pivot table, and that's why the chart changes when you hit the slicer, not because the slicer is controlling the chart directly. So if I cut this slicer and paste it onto my sheet that we made over here, you can see that it is indeed moving the bar chart when I change it. It's not moving the pie chart yet though. I have to connect this slicer to all the pivot tables that I want it to control in order for that to happen. So I'm going to pop it back onto the other sheet. You actually don't have to move it to do this, but I just want to do it so you all can kind of follow what I'm doing. So I'm back here, and if I go click on the slicer and go up to the slicer menu, there's this report connections button, and that will tell me which pivot tables this slicer is connected to and on what sheets. So these are all in the example pivots sheet. I don't want that right now. We're in sheet 1 right now. So let me scroll down until I find sheet 1. Okay, cool. There's my 2 pivot tables on sheet 1. And right now it tells me it's connected to pivot table 30. I know it's this one because I connected it to that one, but if you're not sure, I'll show you in a second how to tell the name of a pivot table. But for right now, I'm going to check off the other one, 31 and hit OK. And now it's controlling both of them. You see the numbers are changing for both of them. And you can see the name of a pivot table by clicking inside the pivot table, going up to the pivot table analyze menu, and looking to the left here. This is where it says it's pivot table 31. You can rename that too if you want to anything you want. So now if I move my slicer back over, again, I'm going to cut and paste. It is now controlling both the pie chart and the bar chart. And if I were to create new pivot tables by copying and pasting one of these, those new ones will automatically be connected to the slicer because these are connected to the slicer. And you can unconnect them by going back to the report connections button again and doing that. So it's all based on the pivot tables themselves. It's not controlling the charts directly, but it's a really awesome way to get these filters in here and kind of let the user control the dashboard instead of having to make more and more charts for this. And then if you want to make another one, you just do the same thing. So back to the thing, insert slicer, and if you do another, you don't usually want to pick a number column, by the way, for these, because it will literally list out every unique number in the data set, and that's going to be ridiculous, right? Like if I list out every single age, every single daily rate, you typically want to pick a text column for these. So something like you can also pick a number if it represents a category. So stock level option, for example, that's a number, but I believe it represents categories, right? The levels of the options, there's only 0, 1, 2, and 3. And now again, I can bring this over here to my dashboard sheet, and they're both controlling it now. So I can have it, oh, I'm sorry, I have to connect this one to the other report because I only did it from the first one. So I go back to my report connections and check off that second pivot table again. And now they're both controlling. So right now I'm looking at male and stock option level 2. Now it's female and stock option level 2. You can select multiple by holding down shift, and now it's both of these stock option levels and female. And you can clear it by hitting this little tiny button in the top right with the red X. And now it's back to everything. You can keep going with these. I wouldn't go too far. I think probably like 2 or 3 max will make the most sense. And you can also connect them, as we saw, to just one chart, 1 or 2 charts at a time. They don't always have to control the whole dashboard. So there's a lot of versatility with this option. And people really tend to like this feature of Excel, and they don't know that it's there. If you have the new version of Excel 2, there's also a timeline one. You need a date to do that, though, and I actually don't think that this data set has any dates. But that one's really cool too. It's the same exact concept where it gives you this little panel, but it's a slider. So you can slide the time to like whatever you want, like past 6 months or this date to this date. So that's another pretty nifty option as well. But you have to have at least one date field for that to work. It won't even give you the option otherwise.
That is really cool. Does anyone have any questions about this or 4-bar? We have like 5 minutes left. I know it takes a few minutes to type, so yeah. I could keep talking to you, Barb, but this is really helpful. Thank you so much for showing us this little sneak peek into the slicer tool. That's really cool.
Yeah, I'm glad it made it onto the recording. People love the slicer tool, and it looks scary when you see it, but as you can see, it's really not that bad to implement. It might take practice. You know, all of these things will take practice. You're not going to pick it up overnight, but
that's awesome. So for anyone who might have tuned in late, really quickly, I would love for you just to give us one more brief insight into the link that you shared with the resources. And we'll put this in the description for the chat for anyone who's watching the recording. And then maybe just quickly a little blurb on kind of what your company does and what you do at Blockspot. And then we can kind of send us off for, I don't even know what day it is, Wednesday, into our Wednesday.
Yeah, what was the first part of that? The link that goes to the data set?
Yeah, so what resources can we find there? I know there's some examples. A couple people were asking, like, where are we getting all these charts? And I sent that.
Oh, yeah. So I put a link in the chat, and if you go to the link, it's just a pretty empty page on my website where it just has another link to download the Excel file. And then everything that you saw there is in that file, except the thing that we did together. I demonstrated, but that dashboard with the slicer is in there. The table is in there. Everything's in there. I will post the slide deck on Twitter. We can send that out also on in the email, and we'll send out the link where you can download the data set in the email too. But yeah, that you have access to all of it. And then my company, like I was saying, we do statistical consulting, and I guess now at the end of the year, I was telling Lauren, a lot of people are coming to us saying, I want to look back at the last year's data and how did my company do, and how can we kind of move forward? Or for larger companies, sometimes they'll have us come into, like, if they have an HR department or a marketing department, and the analysts in HR are expected to do a lot of their own Excel, but they're not trained in it. We do support with that too. So really anything data analytics related, whether it's like taking on an entire project or supporting internal employees with their analyses, just so they can get from that data to making decisions with the data, because you don't want to guess when it comes to stuff. Like, you want to use your data to make data-driven decisions, smarter decisions that you can take action. Just like we talked about with the dashboards today, right? You want to be able to take action from your analyses, and that's what we help people do.
Well, that's fantastic. Thank you so much, Barb. Thanks for coming on and showing us just a brief little insight into creating these dashboards. It's super, super helpful. And then, of course, just as always, thanks for sharing your expertise and your time with us today. Getting some great feedback in the chat, so we really appreciate you.
Oh, good. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, thank you all who are on the call today. Really appreciate you being here with us today. Tomorrow, we're going to be talking about building your technical resumes. So to get interviews, great chat to attend before kicking off 2020 rather. And then Friday, we're going to wrap up with managing remote tech teams. So 2 really great chats that I think would be very valuable to everyone on this call. So make sure to go and register for those. And if I don't see you at one of those chats, have a great holiday, and we'll see you in 2020. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks, Lauren. See ya.
Bye.